And so let's get back to where we were. What do you know about the judges? Well, if I talk about the clock of the judges, does that ring a bell? You see what's up, see the word faithful up there at 12 o'clock? Now don't immediately put the slide up there, Buzz. Give us a second, give us our minds a second to look at this. What word goes at 3 o'clock on this clock? You know, at noon or at 12, the people are faithful to God. They were faithful all the days of Joshua. What happened when Joshua dies and Joshua's generation dies? What happens to them? That's the word that goes at 3 o'clock. You know what that word is? Go ahead and put it there, Buzz. It's idolatry. And this clock is found almost 15 times during the period of the Judges. Sometimes it's very obvious the way it sounds, and Judges chapter 2 lays out this clock. And so whenever the Israelites turn to the matter of idolatry, God allowed the nations to come and plunder them. He dealt with Israel in a physical way, more so than He does with individuals today, because they were His chosen people, and it was His way, other than the prophets, of getting His message to them. Well, what happens when these nations came? Now, what word goes at 6 o'clock? What did the people do? They repented. There is this matter of the nations coming against them, and they repented. They cried out to God. Then what happened? If you know the nature of God, you'll know the word that goes over there at 9 o'clock. And what word goes over there at 9 o'clock? People crying out to God, what does He do? Well, He raises up deliverers. And I've got deliverers / judges because that's exactly what these men were. And so you've got 350 years of Bible history as you look at this nation. And if you'll memorize this clock, it will help you understand 350 years of Jewish history. Now, the reality is they continued to do idolatry after they no longer had judges. The next period in the Bible after the judges is when they don't want to have judges. They say, give us a king. And the story of the kings is almost found in this same kind of circle. It's not quite as obvious, but the nature of God doesn't change, and the nature of mankind doesn't change. Whenever you get to King Saul, he is the one who leads them away from God. They were faithful for a while. Saul was faithful, and then the nation turned to idolatry. It did not happen to idolatry in the days of David, but in the days of Solomon. Solomon was the leader who led them into idolatry, and the greatest kingdom on the earth at this time, Israel, that reached all the way from the Euphrates River almost down to the borders of Egypt. That kingdom was divided. What happened? Well, they turned to idolatry, and God sent the nations against them, and sometimes they would repent, but not often. There were 19 kings in that southern kingdom. How many of those kings were righteous? There were 4. And so it's not a circle that just goes around 15 times. It goes around 19 times, figuratively speaking, not quite as obvious, but the nature of God does not change. And so you've got that understanding of it. And so you look at that, and it's really, really important to be aware of this. In the book of Judges and also in the book of Joshua, you read about the angel of the Lord. Someone asked me about that this morning and said, would you talk about it? What do you know? who is that or what is that? Well, my answer is, I don't know. And here's the reason I do not know. There are two reasons. In the New King James, the word angel is capitalized. I think that colors our view toward this matter when we talk about the angel of the Lord. You capitalize the name of deity. And that's why the translators did it. And I understand that, but you've got to understand, in the Greek, there's no capital. I mean, in the text of the Bible, there were no capital letters or lowercase letters, and I understand that. And so there are times when you read about the angel of the Lord, and it sounds just like God speaking. At the burning bush, the angel of the Lord appeared to Moses. And so people look at that expression, angel of the Lord, they say it's got a capital A, and so they assume then that must mean Jesus in the Old Testament was an angel of the Lord. And whenever he speaks, it sure sounds like God speaking. You know, at the burning bush, God spoke to Moses. Well, who spoke to Moses? The angel of the Lord. You know, and so who is the angel of the Lord? Is it God or is it not God? And, I think we would be better off if we recognize that many times the expression angel of the Lord is used and it does not refer to Jesus. And so when somebody asks me about in this place or in this time, is the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament Jesus? The answer I can give to that emphatically, not always. Not always. And so I know it's commonly believed that the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament is Jesus, but there are times you read that angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, and it could not be Jesus. And so that's why whenever I talk about the angel of the Lord, I'm not sure. And here's the other reason I am not sure. In Hebrews chapter 1, there is an announcement about the deity of Jesus. God, who in former times spake unto the prophets by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son. That's obviously Jesus. He is the brightness of God. He is the express image of God. But then, when you get to the last two verses, because after you get through the early verses in this chapter, magnifying the deity of Jesus, in the first 4 or 5 verses of Hebrews chapter 1, he says, he's so much greater than the angels. And so he asked the question, to which angel did God ever say, thou art my son? And that's the verse that bothers me. That's the verse that makes me not be as emphatic and arrogant and scholarly as I used to be. To which of the angels did he say, thou art my son? To the angel of the Lord. If, that's Jesus in the Old Testament. But if Jesus is the angel of the Old Testament, he did say, thou art my son. But the whole contrast there is between the lesser nature of angels and the greatness of Jesus. So, I read those when I get to the burning bush, when I get to the angel of the Lord appearing to Joshua, when I see the angel of the Lord coming, perhaps it's in the story of Gideon. I'm not absolutely positive that it's there, but it's mentioned in the book of Judges several times. And an angel of the Lord can speak for God. Why? because he's a messenger of God. And so the prophets, thus says the Lord. And then the Lord says, when the concept of the Lord speaking in the Old Testament, it is the Lord speaking, but he's speaking through the prophets. And so there, the word angel just means a messenger, and so there is the messenger of God that appeared. And when we get to the story of Gideon, we'll try to look a little bit more at that, but I appreciate that question. It's good to be stimulated, and it's widely believed by people that I have utmost respect for, their scholarship, but they, when I asked them about, well, what about Hebrews 1? I was at a lectureship of polishing the pulpit, and the speaker talked about the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, did an outstanding job. But after the lecture, I went up and I said, what do you do about Hebrews 1? That implies Jesus never said to even one angel, thou art my son. And he said, I've never thought about that. Well, when I think about it, I arrive at the point of saying, I'm not sure. And does it make any difference if I know for sure whether that's Jesus in the Old Testament or not? I don't know that it makes that much difference or not. All right, let's get back now to the book of Judges. The Israelites came into that promised land. So look at that map, and the map that is on the screen is too little for you to see much at all about it. I've got another map in just a minute. You won't be able to tell anything about it, but I introduced this map because I love the way it's color-coded. You see the Dead Sea, you see that elongated body of water right in the middle of the map, not the blue one that's on the right side of the river as you look at it, but now you see that that Dead Sea that's down there. And then you can see the green. That's the land that Simeon was supposed to have. And you look up on more in the middle of the map, and you see a little tiny spot that is, I'm not even sure what color that is, but that's where Benjamin settled. And over to the right of Benjamin, a little white dot, that's where the tribe of Dan settled until they left that place and went all the way up to the northern kingdom. And above that, you've got Manasseh. Remember that the tribe of Manasseh, part of it was on one side of the Jordan River and part of it on the other side, the half tribe of Manasseh. If you look up there, is that a cream color? You can see that that's where Manasseh was. Now, I've introduced this to give a further insight into the book of Judges. We think about the Jews because they had such great armies that we thought that they just had a standing army. So anytime the Philistines came in, they'd get their commander-in-chief to blow the trumpet, and then the army, is it the National Guard? You know, it's a standing army. Well, David had a standing army. Saul had a standing army. Well, when the people come into the land, God wanted them to be a nation of tribes that had one God. And there's not much room for politics in that, if you'll stop and think about it. When they come to the promised land, God's intent was what about the Levites? Were they sort of a leading force? They should have been, but when they divided the land, God did not give the Levites any land at all. He sent the Levites to 48 different cities. And so the Levites were scattered all over the tribes. And it was God's intent for the Levites not only to be a priestly tribe, but to be a teaching part of the kingdom of Israel. They were those individuals whose responsibility was not just to offer animal sacrifices, but to teach the people. Well, how long does that last? Not long at all. And so they're faithful to God once they get to the promised land all the days of Joshua. When Joshua and that generation dies, they are, I don't want to say nomadic, because nomadic means they moved about. No, they've done that the previous 40 years down in that wilderness. They've now arrived in that land. They're living in cities. But they were unstructured as a nation, and that was God's plan. When we study about Gideon and the great victory that he had, the people asked Gideon to be their king. That's interesting. We want to be sort of like these nations about us. At least they thought it'd be far better to have a king than what we do have. And so Gideon said, I will not be a king over you. You already have a king, and that's Jehovah God. That gives you some concept of what the Lord had in mind. He put them in that promised land, gave them the prophets, gave them the priests especially, to be spokesmen and teachers of the people, and their life was very, very simple. I don't know where you come from, but every now and then you can start thinking about the way it used to be in the world I grew up in. Some folks call them rednecks. They're simpletons in many respects. Even to this day, sometimes you go up to places up there in Tennessee and some other places where there are just little pockets of people that it is remarkable how ignorant they are in a sense, and yet how wise they are in another sense, because they're not overly wrapped up in politics. And it's a very simple lifestyle. I was in a meeting earlier this year. I was in that same area last year, and there are 40,000 people in that area. It's Warren County, Tennessee. And how can I tell you what it's like except by telling you in that county there's only one Walmart, and you've got to know where it is to find it. It took me 2 days to find it. You know what they've got? Mom and pop shops. Simpletons. There's no Pizza Hut. There may be one. You know where they buy their pizza? Fred's got good pizzas down here. Fred's got his shop. Let's go try Fred's pizzas. I met a couple there in the church. She had grown up in that area. She had become a professional lady in her lifestyle. And she met her husband. He was from California. And so all of a sudden, they were starting their families. And they said, where on earth can we raise godly children? And she thought of that area, and she says, that's where it can happen. By the way, he runs the best pizza place that I may have ever eaten at on this earth. You know, in the place where his Pizza Hut is, it's not downtown. It's just in a little where crossroads are that come together out in that part of the county. I think they've got one other store there and about 3 abandoned shops. And people all over the county drive to his place to get pizzas. Think about the problems we have in schools here. You know why you'd want to raise your kids in that side of in that city? No gangs. And while there are drugs and there are problems with drugs with the young people in that county, it is so minute compared to the rest of America, it's unreal. So they took their family back to, if I say Mayberry, Tennessee, you understand what I'm talking about? You know, I don't know what Andy Griffin's show, but that's what I feel like I'm at. Is the barber's name Fred? You'll have to help me with all these names on Mayberry, and you know, and was it Gomer or was it the other guy that ran the filling station? Guess what they don't have there? They don't have restaurants. Oh, they've got great places to eat. First time I was there, Julie and I were there and tried to find a place to eat. We went down on the square down there. Somebody says, now you got to go down there and try this place. It's a barbecue place. Well, anybody that knows anything about life knows how to barbecue meat. And so he barbecued meat. He's down on the main street, right on the main street. And we went in. It was the absolute best barbecue sauce I've ever tasted. And I asked the waitress, I said, where'd you get this sauce? I said, well, he makes it, but he won't tell anybody what's in it. So I got to know him, and he and I became somewhat good friends, at least that's the way I viewed it. And he was that close to giving me that recipe of barbecue sauce. Look at the map. No idols. If they'd done what God said, they would have destroyed every idol in that place. That's what God said. In fact, God says, after you destroy the idols, don't even speak their name. How can you talk about Baal if the word Baal is not in your vocabulary? How can you call upon Baal like the prophets of Baal did to send down fire from heaven if you don't even know the name Baal? God intended for them to get in there and protected them, you know, over to farther out on the right side. You've got you've got the desert area. It's Arabia, Saudi Arabia. What's that? It's oil wells and sand. That's what Saudi Arabia is. And there's no way to get there except to come down from the north. There's a very mountainous area there in the north where Lebanon is. And it was a lot of protection in those days. Whoever controls the high ground controls it. And they ruled all the way from the top of that map all the way up to the Euphrates River, all the way down to the land of Egypt. There are no nations. And had they done what God wanted them to do, they would have been isolated and yet they were in the center of history. You remember in studying world history, you learned about the crescent that there was, that place that goes through goes through Babylon and Assyria. They called it the Fertile Crescent. You go over the Euphrates and you curve all the way down and come all the way down to this land. How's this land described? A land that flows with milk and honey. And that's where they were. Buzz, I think I've got another slide after this one. I'm pretty sure I do. Go ahead and put that up, because now you won't be able to see anything. But you see all those little white squares that are there? That shows where the judges lived. 350 years, and they were not located in the capital city of Jerusalem. They lived in various tribal places throughout that land. And so whenever the Philistines might come from the Mediterranean Sea and over, you know, on the the lower left corner of the map as you look at it, where the Philistines were, whenever they came up against Israel, how did that impact those those tribes further north? Not much at all. because that judge was used by God to take care of the Philistines. And so it was not that they had a standing army, nor that the judges, when they became deliverers, organized a nationwide army. The Lord doesn't need many or few. He can do it either way He wants to in winning the battle. And the story about Gideon will show all of that. But I saw that map. I copied it from somebody else. And on the right side of it, I've put the names of the judges. Now, can you read those names? Anybody tell me the name of that first judge? Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon. You think we could learn those first five? Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon. What do we know about these? Well, the name Shamgar, and when you get down to Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, you've got 2 verses devoted, maybe 3 verses to each one of them. We don't know much at all about Shamgar. What we do know is really, really fascinating. Let me point out, as we look individually at these, what's the name of that first judge? Othniel. Let's look at that next slide, Buzz, and there he is. What would be a good thing to remember about Othniel? Well, Buzz, you're doing a great job. I see you over here. Thank you very much. I'm amazed that your arm is long enough to reach back there, whoever that is back there. Got a TV screen in front of me, so you know. Othniel, Caleb's son-in-law. Now, who's Caleb? Do you remember Caleb's compadre? You remember the guy? Well, Caleb was one of the spies when they went in to spy out the promised land. The other guy that went in, that is of note, is a man by the name of Joshua. And so all the days that Joshua is alive, and all the day Joshua's generation is alive, how many people are as old as Joshua when they get into the promised land? Othniel. Where's everybody else? They all died in the wilderness, except those who were 20 years and younger whenever they left Egypt. And the Levites are not included in that number. When they number the people, the number does not include the Levites. So you've got all of those people, and every one of them died. Are they faithful during the days of Othniel? Well, Othniel becomes the first judge, but between the death of Joshua and Caleb is where they turn to idolatry. God allows the nations to come against them. Remember the clock now. Can you see that clock? Joshua, they're faithful to the times of Joshua and Caleb, and then they turn to idolatry. And all of a sudden, these nations that they did not drive out, these nations begin to plague them. God said, they're going to be thorns in your side. You need to file that away. The next time you wonder about Paul's thorn in the flesh, the first time that expression is used is in reference to these nations that were there around the Jews. And the Lord said more than once, there'll be thorns in your flesh. There'll be thorns in your body. And that's what they were. And that's where Othniel comes from. But before we introduce a great deal about him, Let's go back to Caleb. We know the age of Caleb. Whenever he was sent out to spy out the land. We know that because we know how old he was when he got into the promised land. Buzz, if you could back up to that previous map, if you don't mind doing that. They get into that land. And down in that southern area, that larger green area near the bottom of that mountain, not the dark green, but the lighter green, is where the mountains were. You remember what the other 10 spies said? There are giants in that land. And so when they get into the promised land, Caleb says to Joshua, I'm 85 years of age. What is it about when you get older, you start telling everybody how old you are? I'll be 85 in July. That's Caleb's age. And I was a young man when we spied out this land, and you said there are giants in the land, and you know where they are? They're in those mountains down there. And Caleb says to Joshua, give me that mountain and I'll take care of the giants. I'll take care of the evil people in there. If you're 85 and above, you need to hear that. Your life is not over. When somebody says, well, when I get old, this will help me. You've heard me say, I think I've said it in here, how many years do you expect to live on this earth? What's life expectancy? Is it about what, 70 years, 70 plus years? What's half of 70? Well, that's 35. You know what that means? You're going to love this one. If you're 35, you're middle-aged. I'm talking to a lot of middle-aged people right now. Maybe not older, but I'm talking to a lot of middle-aged people. Now, Joshua is 85. He said, I want that mountain. And he and his family and those around him go down, and they take the very mountains, that very land, that when he was a younger man and went out as a spy, they came back and they said, we're well able to take the land. God is with us. And now, 40 plus years later, Caleb says, he's still with us. I want this mountain. Folks, I don't care what age you are, set some goals in your life. And I'm not talking about being a multimillionaire. I'm talking about making a difference on this earth as you get older. And it starts when you're younger. You make that decision right now that I'm going to be a better person. Now, Caleb says, whoever takes this particular place, I'll give him my daughter. Now, how great would it be to be married to the daughter of somebody like Caleb? And so there's a man down there that takes him up on that and defeats the people in that land. Caleb, being an honest man, gives his daughter to be the wife of a man by the name of Othniel. So go back to the clock. Faithful, idolatry, nations, repentance, and God raises up the first deliverer. That's amazing. Othniel. So there's that connection. Now, let's get back to that slide that shows Caleb or Othniel as Caleb's son-in-law. Do you know anything about Ehud? What one thing is unique about Ehud? He's the only man in the Bible whose name we know that was left-handed. We have time, we're going to talk about, probably try to cover his entire life today. We'll come back to Ehud in a minute. I think David had 70 men that were left-handed. One of the warriors had 70 men that used the slingshot left-handed. And they're mentioned by number. Is it 700? Maybe I've lost, maybe it's either 70 or 700. It must be 700 that were left-handed. And we don't know who they are. Anyway, Ehud, left-handed judge. In many respects, the story I'd rather tell than any of the story of the judges is Ehud. Look at Shamgar. What do you know about him? 2 verses. Shamgar is that individual who took an ox goad. What is an ox goad? You know what an ox is? You know how you drive an ox? You have a long stick, and you stick that ox that's in front of you, plowing or pulling the wagon, and you stick that stick in his legs. And you goad the ox. And when you goad the ox goes. And so you know what Shamgar did? He took an ox goad and went against the Philistines. And now we're back over here to God bringing up a third deliverer. He's brought up Othniel, he's brought up Ehud. Look at Shamgar. What are you going to remember about Shamgar? He killed 600 Philistines with a stick. How you do that? You think that's any problem with God? How does God take brick masons from Egypt, brick makers from Egypt, and turn them into a nation? The same way he can put an ox goad in the hands. Now, you would use that ox goad and prick the leg of that oxen. And I say it that way because when the Lord appeared to Paul on the road to Damascus, he says, Saul, Saul, and Saul says, who art thou, Lord? Not Jehovah. Who are you, Lord, Master? I'm Jesus whom you persecute, and it's hard for you to kick against the prick. That's the King James. What does that mean? Here's stubborn Saul of Tarsus. And he's arresting all these Christians and he's putting them to death. He heard the entirety of that sermon. And the entirety of all that it was intended was to prick the heart of that man. Well, what's the ox going to do? You stick somebody, what do you do when a bee stings you on the leg? You kick, don't you? Yeah. Who does it hurt? Well, it sort of jars the man that's got the sick. What's it do to the ox? It's hard for the ox. And so on the road to Damascus, it's hard for you to kick against the prick. I cannot imagine. Use your imagination. One man against 600 people. 600 Philistines. Fill this building full, fill up every seat, and it'll hold about 600 people. Now you make all of those warriors, make all of those Philistine individuals who are hefty and who are farmers or perhaps maybe even soldiers. And here's a man standing up here with a stick, and he killed everybody in here. That's what he did. Now, what do you know about Deborah? Deborah is the woman judge. We're going to take time to talk about her life. Very fascinating. And then the last one we're going to look at, go ahead and put Deborah up there. I believe we've got the woman judge. And then go ahead and put the next one up there, and that is Gideon. With an army of 300 soldiers, 300 men, he killed 120,000 Midianites. Midianites, I guess it is. Isn't that amazing? Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon. That's all we want to learn today. Abimelech is his son. That's pretty interesting, but we're not going to talk about him. Let's get back to Ehud. Ehud lives at a time, and you open up the book of Judges, and you just might want to open up your Bibles because we don't have any more slides to look at. We got a Bible to look at now. And I believe that Judges is a book that would be good to people just trying to learn how to read and everything, your children, your grandchildren. It's not a bad book of the Bible to read. There's some things in it that are a bit more gory than what you would see at Disney. But there's a reason behind all of that in relationship to this. But look at the matter of Ehud. He comes in the middle of chapter 3, verse 12. Look at that verse. And the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. Look up in verse 7. So the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. You see, that's right before Othniel comes on the scene. Faithful, and then they turned to idolatry. They forgot the Lord, in verse 7, and served the Baals and the Ashtaroths. Look in verse 12. The children of Israel again. See, look at that word again, because it just happened. Look at verse 11 says, during the time of Othniel, they had rest for 40 years. As long as that judge is alive, things are in pretty good shape. But in verse 12, the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. The Lord strengthened Eglon, king of Moab, against Israel, because he had done evil in the sight of the Lord. And he gathered himself the people of Ammon and Amalek, and he went and defeated Israel and took possession of the city of palms. That's likely Jericho. So the children of Israel served Eglon of Moab 18 years. What do you know about, verse 15, when the children of Israel cried out to God, the Lord raised up a deliverer, a judge. And his name was Ehud, and there is his genealogy. That's as far as we can get. So we'll take up with the life of Ehud the next time we're here together. Thank you very much.